Mabuhay, everyone. This is Veronica, host of this podcast, Everything's Political, broadcasting here at Radyo Kapwa on CKUT 90.3 FM. Yes, Mabuhay. We are having a bit of a changes in our programming, and Everything's Political, my podcast, is now going to be broadcasting every second Wednesday of the month. And we're going to changes a little bit of how we do things, thanks to Laura, who's pioneering this, accommodating everyone in the team here in Radio Kapwa. So everyone behind the scene, we're a big team, and this radio show has been ongoing since 2023. And so we're trying to practice what we preach by being mindful of everyone's capacity. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Laura, Kyla, Fanny, our media. So there's MJ, Des is also behind the scene. I know I'm missing some other people. Me, Kat, Nikki. We're a lot of people in here, and so I'm very, very, very grateful to have this type of platform and to be able to still bring a lot of our kapwa and sharing the mic. For today's episode for Everything's Political, I'm actually kind of going to merge a bit of how we do things with Radio Kapwa and use my platform for this episode and bringing in my own guests for Everything's Political, but also Radio Kapwa. There's a lot of connection that has been made, and I'm pretty excited for you all, my dear listeners, to meet Alixia. She Day, a Cebuano Canadian designer whose heart has found home in two places, Cebu in the Philippines and Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Through the practice of design and planning, Alexa is dedicated to reviving our spirituality and kinship with our water, land, and plant and animal relatives. So we have a lot of things to talk about. Off the record, we're like, where do we start? Because we started talking. I met Alexa when I think my first POP was 2023, right? Because have you been sporting that mullet?
Sporting the mullet for 2 years now, I think.
Okay, so it was the second POP that I saw you with a mullet. I tried. I tried to do it. I couldn't pull it off. So I chop it off. I mean, Alexa, everyone's listening to you. I have a very brief introduction for you, but I know that you're much more cooler than four lines of your bio. So please let our dear listener know here in Montreal, someone from the prairies. What's up?
Wow. Hello. Thank you for having me, Vero. It's pretty cool to be here. So, I've been trying to introduce myself according to where I come from in the Philippines.
Mm.
I would say that in English, it would be translated as I am a warm but hot-headed person who stands watch on the shore of on the shores of wading depth water because I
That is
am
so poetic.
I am from my grandmother on my dad's side is from Initao, which is in Misamis Oriental. My my grandmother from my mom's side is from Bantayan Island, just off of Cebu province. And then my dad's side grandfather is from Baybay Leyte. And then my grandfather from my mom's side is from Cebu Island, Cebu province. So combining all of those makes up one me, but at the same time, that also makes up my sisters. So those are, in terms of land, in terms of family, those are my kinship relations. And then coming here in Treaty One territory in Winnipeg, I've also been encouraged to introduce myself that way because of the friends and First Nations and Métis and Inuit friends that I've had here. And so for them, I'm really grateful because they have led me home,
Mm.
oddly enough. Yeah, that's it. That's how I've been introducing myself. So
It's very interesting way to introduce yourself. I know off the record when we had a chat a few days before, we're going to tackle about what we talked about too, because it's very exciting. I think we both just nerded out.
we did. Yeah.
To also bring in, our parents in our conversation who basically shape who we are. right? So
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very good way to envision. I think in South Kapwa, in our previous episodes, we normally talked about our ancestors and like envisioning that, your ancestors holding your shoulder and then someone's holding their shoulder. And then before you know it, it's like a whole entire like angkan, like your
Mm,
entire clan, right? And you can trace where you are at, like in the islands of the so-called
yeah.
Philippines. So I think it's so fitting that you even mention where they're from and which island. There's a lot of islands in the Philippines. It's over 7,000 islands. So it's one of the first time that I received that type of introduction. So thank you for bringing in your ancestors with us in here.
It's nice that you mentioned that because in actual Cebuano, when I introduce myself in Cebuano, it's different. I translate it differently into English
Mm.
because I'm a sucker for the poetic part of it. So
I knew you and I both.
so there is a little bit of like what is that called, like artistic um agency or like whatever the
Mm-hmm,
word is.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So but in Cebuano, the way I would say it is ang initaw, bantayan, sugbo, ug baybay ang akong ginikanan. And it like word for word is translated as initaw, bantayan, Cebu or Sugbo and Bye Bye are my parents. So,
Mm.
because the word ginikanan comes from the word gikan, which also means like a place you are from or something like that. And it's also the word for parent or like the womb or whatever the parents you come from. So, yeah. We've already started our podcast just by my introduction.
I mean, you basically answered my question because you were like, in English, it's this, and I'm like, why don't you say it in Cebuano, Bisaya? So that being said, what are the difference between Cebuano Bisaya?
Oh, Cebuano and Bisaya? Like what's that
Yeah.
difference?
Mm-hmm.
I would say based on like what I've learned through school in the Philippines and like more studies as I've sort of finished school and all of that, um I have come to understand that Bisaya refers to a broad category of languages that fall in the Visayas region. So, Waray is Bisaya. I think Panay Bukidnon is Bisaya. Hiligaynon is Bisaya. Aklanon is, I think, Bisaya. Somebody can correct me. And then Cebuano is a type of Bisaya too. So I think that would be the distinction. It's like if Bisaya is the big branch, Cebuano is one stem.
So are you talking about the community of it, of like the kinship of the people in those islands, or are
Mm.
you talking about more in terms of who speak the language itself? Because you said something like some people from like Aklan are Bisaya, but I think they do speak another language.
Yes, yes. It's more the regional placement of folks.
Mm-hmm.
And once you put ka Bisayan, then
Mm.
the relationship of everyone who is there and that the islands is like are there and the islands and the seas are their connectors.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start going through why we started nerding out and why we started having this connection. But this connection, you will hear it after this break. So before we went on a break, we're about to breach in why we were nerding out, and I'm going to give you a little bit of tease, my dear listeners, because last POP Pinoys on Parliament, hosted by Kabangka. Thank you, Kabangka, for always empowering the Filipino youth here in Canada. I think there was this panelist, her name was Ferdy, and started unpacking the word Kabangka because I mean the whole like event was organized by the Kabangka people, and I was very fascinated about it. So I came back up to the decompression room and I started being like, you know what? Maybe I can do something about this. I want to do something about unpacking Tagalog words and such. And you were there. And then you
Yeah.
started talking about some I thought that was Tagalog words, and you're like, no, this is Bisaya, this is Cebuano. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm listening then. I mean, my Tagalog centric and dominance came out, and I know I'm very mindful of like not taking space as a Tagalog speaker as well. So I was like, I'm listening. And then it was just from there on, like we're just both nerding out. And I think at some point some people were listening to us.
I know. It was so like it was actually people were listening. There were like I think five or something people in the decompression space with us. And like at first we were like geeking out already for what Ferdy was saying. And then he said something about like kapwa and loob and stuff. And then like, yeah, like in Bisaya, I have to be more specific. In Cebuano Bisaya, there's like this, and that. And then people, and then I went around to you, and then people were like looking at us, and I was like, what the fuck? We're just nerds here.
I remember the last POP 2024, we literally we whipped out a mic. Laura had a mic on that she borrowed from someone else, and then other people started like, oh, I want to talk too. I want to have my piece too.
Yeah.
And then it went around a bit. It was funny because we had like those Play-Doh, and the mic is like
Yes.
those little teeny tiny thing. And so we just pinned it to like one stick and then stick it to the Play-Doh like it's a little plant, and
Uh-huh.
then that's how we've been passing the mic on. And we just started talking, and when we looked up, there were people by like the door frame listening to us, right? So spaces like Radio Kapwa or like this podcast really, for me, really highlights like we're Filipinos, so we like storytelling, we like listening into people. A lot of people would say it's chismis. I would say we're
I was
just
gonna
passing
say,
on the knowledge, right? And yes,
yeah,
fuck it, it is chismis, fine. But we're also just generally curious about, like, our kapwa. There's over 120 million Filipinos in the Philippines alone, and that's like excluding almost 1 million people here in Canada. So we're just generally curious. And again, me who grew up my childhood in the Philippines in Manila area, I'm pretty much centric in the big city. And going out and like moving out of the Philippines, you meet so many more Filipinos who are not from the Luzon area. And so meeting you and you talking about kalibot, and I'm like, yeah, you do the libot, and you're like, that's not it, I was just like, I'm listening, let's do this. So again, just two of us nerding out in the decompression room by Sound Kapwa during the POP. Off the record earlier, when we were taking a break, you shared about your, would I say advocacy, but your interest in terms of spirituality and coming back to how our ancestors were. We briefly talked about Babaylan, and today on this recording, it's International Women's Day as well. So, how is this relevant for us? Especially us Filipino, as queer Filipinos as well. Like, why is this day a good way to talk about our trans sisters and queer sisters?
mm,
I caught you off guard there, huh?
you did. Yeah. I think I don't know. It's because I think to be honest with you, I think we should just celebrate it every day.
Why you look like so killing right now?
I celebrate it every day because why do we all like it's important because we've internalized how our voices should not be heard or listened.
Mhm.
And now that, like internationally, we are recognizing
There's
how
so much
yeah,
work that has been done and so much
yeah,
work we're still doing.
yeah. I could tell a story then. Here. So I have research up in Sagada to help preserve heritage landscapes such as the Dapay, Apatpatayan, which is a sacred tree grove. A Dapay is a stone paved council, and a Babawian, which is a an omen observation site. And all of these sites, despite being far away from each other, are all connected for one, through a ceremony and a ritual called bugnas, which is related to the rice harvest. And so, well, I talk about that because when men go into a dapay, they're all like deliberating and stuff like that, talking about the situation of the community, the village, how they proceed because they saw an omen or didn't see an omen. And when they go home, it's their wives who give them counsel. So I don't know. That's my answer to your question.
Okay.
Sit with
That
it.
that leaves a lot of time to reflect, and we don't want that time in the radio show. So maybe this is something that we need to go back. Like, oh my god, Lisa, you're giving me more homework.
Because it's women are so women, trans women who are also women are just I've always been there.
We've
We've
always been there.
yeah,
The Yuhan just attempted to
yeah,
erase it, but we still have Babaylans to this day who are alive and well in the Philippines. So we're always been here. We've always been resistant, and for our dear listeners, Babaylans are basically our shaman priestess or like our spiritual leaders. I like to describe them as the in between of the spiritual world and the material world, which once again goes to show how much our spirituality is rooted in nature, that we have leaders who are the in between of the spiritual and the material world. I mean, we're Filipinos, so we're kind of like culturally Catholic. I mean, in my case, I am culturally Catholic. My name is literally taken from a Bible. But in my journey of decolonization, or kind of like knowing like who we were actually before the colonizers started talking about who we are, one of the things is that surely we do have our own religion, right? And that's when we came back to animals and plants, and you mentioned it to your bio animal relatives, because at the end of the day we are one with nature. And so the kinship of protecting our water and land and the plants, because those are the resources and the natural resources that gives, which is why I want to connect it back to a lot of prominent Filipino women are land defender and nature defender, and people who normally defend this type of causes are women, or they are feminized, because the mere fact that you care is pretty much socialized for women to take on to, which sucks, right? I mean, I'm taking this opportunity because it's International Women's Day, but like patriarchy is also equally, if not more damaging actually for men more than women, because they're not letting you be in touch with your femininity when in reality we have feminine and masculine energy. I mean, you and I are looking at each other and we're like pretty masc. Although I do like my eyebrows done, and I do like to have it done like every once in a while too. I want to feel pretty. I do look good in dress, and I like to show off my legs. So like I like to confuse people a lot, because then they would sometimes I would walk, and then I would be like walking very like macho, and then some people would be like Monsieur, and then I would turn around and they'd be like, oh, Madame.
yeah. Whenever I want to do that too, like I feel like there's so much. I get such a big enjoyment out of it. It's like a
Yeah.
shifting dynamics kind of thing, you know.
Mhm.
It's not,
Mhm.
bro.
I'm just like, I mean, listen, we're coming back to why I wanted to bring you on to this podcast and to this radio show. Mostly the use of our languages and how healing it is actually for us to kind of like silip, to kind of see how things were back in the day and how our ancestors were in the day by using our languages. For you would be Bisaya, Cebuano, and for me are Tagalog. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to take one deep breather and listen to our ads, and we'll be back shortly. And we're back for our little brief pause because we've been having too much fun, and also we're doing this with barely any skeleton of like roadmap of what to talk about.
Yeah.
we're just getting to it. But yeah, I just wanna talk about why we started connecting back and having calls when you're all the way to Winnipeg and I'm here all the way to Montreal. And again, we go back to what Ferdy has unpacked. That word kabangka, and I always tell people, I think I've mentioned this several times, both on Radyo Kapwa and on my podcast, that the Filipino language, and I would normally just talk about Tagalog, is more of like a seed, right? And
Yeah.
depending on what you planted as a seed, it grows. The essence is kind of similar, but depending on what you put the prefix or the suffix, it changes a bit, but the essence is there. And kabangka is a good way to actually talk about the history of the Philippines. And I think it's, if you unpack it, the word kabangka is bangka. Bangka means boat. And that already gives you a clue, right? Because the Philippines consists of island nation. And so our concept of neighbors are actually neighboring islands because we're an archipelago. And so bangka. And then Ferdi unpack it even more with bangka, which is barko, right? The other way to say bangka is barko. And I grew up in the Philippines. I left when I was 11. So when you want to talk about like, oh yeah, my friends, my group of friends, we talk about my barkada. So barkada. And then that's when Ferdy went even deeper because already at that time I was freaking and I'm like, no, wow. And then Ferdy was like, oh yeah, and then that's where the barangay came from, right? So barangay is kind of like a quartier, like a neighborhood where like everyone knows everyone and such. So that whole thing, I got up and then I went back to the decompression room and I started typing all of my passion of hearing it. And then I was like super focused. And then you passed by and you're like, oh yeah, let's talk about Kalibot. And then I'm like, okay,
Kalibutan.
Kalibutan. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. You libot me, we're all doing like libot. So libot like entouré, like you're circling me around and that's in Tagalog. And then you're like, no, it's from the word buot. And then I'm like, okay. I
Why does it
remember
actually sound like that?
I know that's just me interpreting it because I'm like, wow, another word. I think I vaguely remember Carl Cervantes when we had Carl Cervantes here. He also is a good advocate to kind of decenter Tagalog as the lingua franca of the Philippines, and also talked about buot a lot. So I wanna give you the chance to actually talked about what it meant and why that was earth shattering for me as someone who speaks Tagalog.
I don't know if I can speak to it. Why it was earth shattering for you?
For me, yeah, I was like, wow, you see, it's not just the Tagalog language. It's like also like in and other Filipino languages, it's the same thing, It's like it's not linear and such.
Yeah,
And then you talked about kalibutan, and then you unpack it to like the root word of buot.
yeah. Well, I'm pulling up a book, although I cannot be sure that it has something along the lines of buot, but uh I read I read this back from the crocodile's belly.
Hell
'Cause-
yeah. I don't have the heart to read it yet. I do have the ebook, but I don't my loob, my buod is not ready to read it yet.
yeah, it's okay. It takes you very, very nicely, very slowly through. Ah, here. Okay, so Christine Moiko, that's the author for the work I'm reading, or like this passage a little bit that I'm reading. It's on page 107, A Healer's Dance, a processual view of Panay, Bukidnon's Babaylan in Motion. And like she mentions here that the upper level of cosmos is called the Kalibutan. And there's also like there's a first book to this, and then in that one I think there also is mention of Kalibutan. And I don't know, I'm just bringing attention to these books because they have traces of language in there that help situate somebody looking for themselves. And so what I would say is that Kalibutan comes from buot, and buot is the innermost self of a person in Cebuano Bisaya. And it's a great word because it's also the root word for something that has gotten spoiled when it's covered in like a Tupperware or something like that. Napuot yan, napuot ang buot, so it's starting to like get rancid and rotten and stuff.
Mhm.
But that comes from the self being stifled and being enclosed in something. But anyway, back to Kalibutan. Kalibutan, when Vero was talking about libut, you were only talking about like the second layer of the word Kalibutan.
Yeah, I didn't know the root word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it comes from the buot, which is the
Hmm.
self. You add libut, what surrounds the self, and then you add the prefix ka, which makes the things surrounding the self and the self relate to each other, and then you add the last suffix an, and then that put them all together, kalibutan, places all of that in a specific place.
Yeah, all of those feelings and all of those history of our ancestors. You know how I was on the second layer, and then you add another layer, and you add another layer, and then this is the package, right?
Yeah.
And with all of those layers that we added, it I think the beauty of it, you mentioned when you were reading the book about language helps situates themselves. And
Mm,
I think when you were talking about that, and then me having the knowledge as a Tagalog speaker, and that meshing together, there is an element of ginhawa. Like, yeah, how can a word perfectly hugs you?
oh
And
yeah.
in a spiritual way of like, our ancestors were up to something, because
Yeah.
hundreds of years, and yet we feel some sort of easiness in with this language, and how healing it is for this type of languages. And the mere fact that you and I can still speak this, I haven't mentioned it in your bio, but you and I are both 1.5 generation, I believe. We both
Yeah.
were born in the Philippines. So we have the privilege of still being able to retain our mother tongue. And so for both of our mother tongues to kind of mingle together and still have the same effect of feeling healed,
Hmm.
especially in our journey of decolonizing. I mean, I'm speaking for me, but I believe it's the same thing for you. And that's when we came up with, how can we use our words to actually heal, right? And then here you are as a Bisaya Cebuano, and here I am as a Tagalog speaker. And yet, contrary to the ongoing, like, we're better because we speak Bisaya, and no, the Tagalogs are this. I mean, listen, the Tagalogs think they're the shits. I can say that. I can take ownership of that one. But also how we can use our differences as actually a form of strength, and moving forward as someone, you and I are both from the diaspora, and how this is healing, right? And
Hmm.
so we had an initial meetup. I'm like, let's do something. Maybe we can do some workshop on POP. Let's plant the seed right now and send this to POP later and be like, this was a
Yeah.
1 year thing, okay? We thought of this. But yeah, I just wanted to hear you, and and wonder how it felt to discover or rediscover all of these words, and without the constant elements of the Yuhan, and refinding your buot.
Yeah. That's such I love that question because it puts me into my place in terms of being here in Turtle Island. Yeah, growing up in the Philippines, we were always taught that the Philippines or whatever comes from the Philippines is less than what is out of the Philippines.
Yeah.
The colonial mentality where you're like always lesser, always inferior. And
Mm-hmm.
when I came here, it was so fucking funny. When I came here, I started putting, so I have a design background, architectural design background. So when I came here, I started putting the titles of my projects as Bisaya words.
Mm.
And then like the white folk would just like absorb it. Like, oh my God, this person speaks a different language.
Wow.
They make it sound every time you put our like a Bisaya word or whatever, a Cebuano word as your title, it makes it sound like more poetic.
I mean, our language is very poetic, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and then I'm not sure about you, but because I speak English and I speak French and I speak Tagalog, and in each languages, my tone and my tempo changes a
Oh, for
bit.
sure.
And
Yeah,
my partner was like, "Yeah, when you speak in Tagalog, it feels slow, and it feels warm." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Does
yeah.
it sound a bit poetic?" She's like, "Yeah, actually, yeah."
Nice,
And then
nice.
she said it just feels very deep, and then it feels very meaningful. And obviously she doesn't understand it, but she just feels like she understands it by the way that I speak it. So I think it's so fun to hear that from people who are like non-speaker of our language. And it hurts sometimes to hear that it has to be an outsider to mention how
Yes.
beautiful it is, right?
Yeah.
But now that we know it, how can we fully expand this and actually plant and instill it to the youth or other people who wants to relearn or come back to their identity as, someone from the Philippines?
Mhm. Well, I don't know. I think for me, like going back to like being placed into being here in Turtle Island, like when I noticed that other people valued my language,
Mm.
I started valuing it even more. And then I met First Nations people who are from here, and like seeing their example to be like defenders of their culture, defenders of their language, of the land, and then seeing all that sort of that really inspired me to go back into my culture and say like, what the hell? What the hell have I been fed all these years? You know, what the hell have my parents have been fed all of these years, and their parents, for them to say that our language is lesser than. So
It's not worth it to study it in higher education.
yeah,
Like right now, there's like a huge conversation because Filipino literature is no longer mandatory to a lot of universities, which is enraging for you and me who are very passionate about our language. And I think off the record when we were having a conversation, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this several times already, but when I was still in the Philippines, so mind you, like maybe 2005, there's this like signs in our hallways that says that you must speak English all the time. And I was pretty mad about it that they sent me to the principal's office because I
yeah,
said, "Who do I speak English with? Everyone speaks Tagalog in here,
yeah,
right?" Now like fast forward, they're still facing the same thing, and now the reason is pretty much of globalization and saying that we need to be more competitive in the global platform. And I'm just like, we have been competitive though, and there's smart people who only speaks Russian, there's smart people who only speaks like Chinese, there's smart people who only speak Spanish. So why do we have to let go of our mother tongue to be competitive? And I think it's so insulting coming from our own to say that we're not competitive enough.
yeah. And I shared like a similar story to that with my First Nations friends. Say, um, when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to speak in Cebuano, right? And if we did, we would get fined. And then
Gosh,
the person I was speaking with was like, wow, that's like residential school. Can you?
it hurts. I mean, you get fined, like you get financially like fined.
Hmm.
Why would you penalize
Pesos.
like students?
5 pesos, and if not 5 pesos, then it was like something called like an action slip where you were like
Oh.
you you were demerited.
Well, oh, you're being disobedient, huh? Because
Hmm.
you have grade for being obedient. Oh my God! I mean,
Hmm.
listen, our education system was set up by the colonizers, so obviously it's set up to benefit them and not us.
Hmm.
But
And you're in legal, right? So you must have read all of our like laws that were sort of based off of both Spanish and American ways of thinking. And
yes,
even in like the way they word things when they refer to the Philippines is so dehumanizing, is so objectifying. It's like really so, oh my God, I couldn't even read it. I could
it hurts to it
it
really
hurts, yeah.
does this it really does hurt. And I think, I'm 30 now, and
Mm,
some other youth, whenever I speak, sometimes would whip up a notebook and start like doing notes, and I'm like, we're not in a lecture here, what are you doing? When you were like, oh, no, 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 sige, go lang, I'm just like listening to you. um Goes to show how much open they are to receiving this information coming from
right,
Kapwa, right? Not coming from a book, an article, or a literature that was written by non-Filipinos. At the same time, I'm also being mindful of how much information I can release without their loo being like deeply
yeah,
hurt,
right,
right?
right,
And it's freaking traumatizing. I think this is one of the factors that led to the creation of Sant Kapwa was that I think one of the first time that I heard Filipino history was off YouTube. I don't know why I tortured myself like that, but there was no Sant Kapwa back then. I didn't know who to speak to about who we are. And so I like, 15 minutes Philippine history, something like that. And I started crying because why am I listening to a white one talked about who we are? And so here in Montreal, language is a huge thing. Le Français, they really want to keep that language is not only a way of communication, but also it's a form of art, and it's form of a heritage for a lot of Quebecois. And it was my partner who is Quebecois who basically was like, why, like I would like our child to be able to speak your language, because this is something that is very important for you. As someone who speaks French is very important for me, and obviously like I want you to do the same thing. And then she was like, I'll do the first move and start learning the language as well, right? And so again, it sometimes came from an outsider perspective to value, like pahalagahan, right? The language. And then it takes people like you and me to hear how passionate we are in these languages and how healing it is, you know? Every time we unpeel that layer of words, it becomes healing. And which is why we're like, we have like an impromptu of like, what would be the title of this so-called workshop if, when we go through this, right? And then I think AJ was like, healing through words, and I'm like, healing through words, that sounds good.
One
um
syllable at a time.
Once, oh man, like there's just so many ways that you add one syllable or one word, or
Yeah,
like two, like a vowel, and then it
yeah,
kind of changes a bit but not really. And so
yeah.
it's super fascinating to be able to expand to it in terms of healing, in terms of talking about the history of our ancestors. And off the record we were talking about what are my trigger words that I normally use for people to
Oh yeah.
become passionate about the language. And I was using the word pahinga, I was
Mm.
using the word kamayan, and is there any words that you feel very passionate as well in Cebuano Bisaya?
Yeah. Oh, well, before I answer that, I wanted to like point out that that one syllable at a time thing is also relevant to Anishinaabe Moan, for example. Like
Ooh, do
our,
tell.
for our kins here in North America, like the word for the drum has the same root is the same root word for heart, is the same root for strawberry. And because they are all the beat of the heart, the shape of the heart, and that kind of thing, and and representing love. So so
Oh,
when my Anishinaabe elder and I would like be in the same room together, it would just be the same thing, like nerding out on our languages because it's the same. We each have different contexts because I'm from the Philippines and he's from here, but the way we wrap up our words for it to hold our culture and what it means for us as a people is basically the same.
yeah. And I think this is a good segue to really empower a lot of our Kapwa to, they always ask like, where do I start? I want to talk about more, want to know more about what happened to my mom, to my dad. I heard that they did something during the martial law. No, 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 no. So I was like, good. If you don't like reading, or you don't like like listening to like essays or like lectures or podcasts or something. And one of the first thing that people always say when I ask them in what ways you were told you were in Filipino, and also they don't speak Tagalog, right? So I'm like, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to learn the language, but not just a means to communicate, but also to see the behind of where those words come from. I don't know where I'm going with this conversation. I had an idea and it came out of my mind. But this is also a good way to point it out and maybe put an erratum, or like mea culpa. Not really mea culpa, but also in my first ever episode, I unpacked the word kapwa, and I unpack it in the way I interpreted it, saying that it is etymologically this, but it's not
Mm,
actually. So the word kapwa is from the word puwang, and puwang means gap or space.
mhm.
And when I unpack it, I unpack it as awa, right? Ka awa, which is also pretty good. I would tap my back for that one. But
Yeah, yeah.
speaking of having space to be able to unpack these words and find healing in it, kapwa is actually sharing the space with you.
Yeah.
And I this is also my moment to be like, and then talk about South Kapwa. But in reality, there's the concept of, oh, you're Canadian, you're American. Those are all like modern concepts of nationality. Our ancestors back in the day, there was no concept of nationality, right? So everyone is your Kapwa because
Mm,
everyone is someone you share the space with and in between as
mm,
well. And being archipelagic people from the islands, all of those gaps are something that you share with other people. So I think it's a good way to rediscover this type of language. Again, like this language, I keep on unpacking the word kapwa and I just keep on rediscovering and finding other means for me to hold on to it dearly, and why words are important because it validates feelings and it validates what you've taught already, and it tells you more stories of our ancestors. If you have comments, feel free for sure. But I just wanted to ask
totally.
you several, like some of our outro questions to end this, and to thank our dear listeners for the patience. We've been nerding out. I'm not sure if we can show it with our voices, but this was a pretty exciting, I would say, discovery.
I was just wondering because like puwang kapwa is a Tagalog word, I think. So I've been trying to find what the equivalent is in Cebuano or if we have that.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that's still something I'm still trying to find. But yeah.
Yeah. Before I ask you the questions that we normally ask people for the Radyo Kapwa side, I wanted to ask a question on my podcast.
Yeah.
Everything's political because everything's connected. And one thing that I asked when I asked you for your bio was like, what well, your pronouns are not here.
That's
I'm like,
true.
well, what's your pronoun, right? And you said she, they. And I embark on like, oh yeah, I go by she as well, even though, I'm more musk than most I'm more musk than most she. I have short hair. I mean, but my hair is longer than my mom's hair, so, and she's pretty femme. And a lot of people would be like, oh, like you're still with a she, even though like I'm outwardly queer and proud to be lesbian. And since we're talking about languages, I think it's because when I learned the English language, I just immediately went on and used this pronoun as my identifier. Whereas in Tagalog, we have more of a gender neutral pronoun, and this pronoun is actually used for pretty much everything. Like you and I are being called Sha when in reality they're talking about the door, right? And I think it's a good way to talk about how you're one with nature and you're one with everything non-living and living things as well. And I wanted to know what you feel about those pronouns, especially when we speak in a language that is not native to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't put it in my bio because in
Let
this
them wonder.
yeah, yes, for one. But also in the space of kapwa, even pronouns are social constructs. So in
Mm-hmm.
the space of kapwa, I am just me.
Mm, mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
closer I get to who I am truly, to my buot, and how that gets expressed through what I do, what I say, how I strive to be a good reflection of my ancestors, for example, is just me
Yeah. It's
in the
not
space.
limited to that word that is
No,
spoken by
absolutely not.
foreigners as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even growing up, it was like I wasn't even so focused on whether I was queer or whether I was straight or whatever. I don't know. It's just a level, a part of me. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I am asked what my pronouns are, then I'll say what it is in English because it's what the English speakers can understand.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but but for sure in the space of kappa, I'm just me. It
yeah.
doesn't yeah.
And it's fascinating also to put that distinction. I know that for maybe for the younger queer, these words are very important for them, and we're
Yes, for sure.
no less that we're
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
minimizing that. I think
yeah,
you and I are very secured with our orientation and our sexuality. So if I'm called Monsieur, I'm called Mister or Sir. I don't really care. I don't
I go
really
like,
give.
yes.
And I'm just like, yes, hello. I mean, like, in my personal Instagram, have you not seen my bigote, like that filter? I look hella handsome, okay? I'm like so guapo, okay? So
Yeah,
like,
and I mean,
I
if you look at my Instagram, it says "Mom, sir" right at the start.
yeah, because again, Filipino are like, but we don't have, there's no English way to say siya, right? So we
Mhm.
gotta go make our own like language. I mean, there's a literal Becky talk. So
Yeah,
there's in the Philippines, there's an entire language that the queer community has successfully concocted, and they
yep,
speak that language. And even I am having hard time like
yeah,
catching up because it's if you're not in that community, you don't practice because like language is an art form, right? And if you don't practice that art form and you have no one to practice with, then it will be hard for you to have the Becky talk.
catch
And
up.
I
Yeah,
am having hard time understanding them. And I sometimes I'm just like, what are they saying? You know,
yeah, yeah,
that and it's fascinating for our queer community in the Philippines to even have their own language. Like that's how good we are, and that's how healing it is for us to take ownership and make a twist of it that is
yeah.
uniquely ours as like mga bakla sa Pilipinas.
Yeah. And I'm grateful you made that distinction about like, yeah, for people who find it important to really identify, I think that I found it important also to identify as something
Mhm.
specific. 'Cause it helped me articulate the thoughts that I was thinking, the feelings I was feeling. But then for some reason, as I kept exploring Kapwa and things like that, it suddenly out of nowhere became like blurred,
Mm,
seeming quote unquote unimportant or
mm,
doesn't matter, but it still does,
mhm.
if only as a stepping point to something that is even beyond that.
Yeah, no,
So there's
I
experience.
definitely get it.
That's probably what it is.
So again, like healing through words, and in what language are we talking about here, right? You and I primarily wants to concentrate more in Cebuano Bisaya and Tagalog, but especially for those who don't have their like their native language, um, for their native language to be gendered, like the Latin-based languages, like it's a bit hard to find ways to feel inclusive or to feel like this speaks to me more. So a lot of people hold on to the pronoun they. I saw some posts, you know, the word queer itself is encompassing, but like in the English language, right? And this was only recent because that was used as a slur towards
Mhm,
us before. And
mhm.
someone was like, how am I supposed to explain that to my noni, to my 90-year-old noni, right? Like what is queer? Like is there a way to say queer in Italian? Like none, right? And so once again, it makes me really feel grateful to be able to still speak the language and have words in our language that really speaks to who we are. And yeah, I think it's a good
Yeah,
way for us to kind of close this conversation. And for me to close those conversations, I have two questions for you, Alexa. One is, in what ways you were told you weren't Filipino enough?
that's the first one.
Yes.
I will answer that by going back to one of the thing you said about being Filipino is more the nationalistic view. I've always understood this question as in what ways have you not been Cebuano enough?
You
Or
know what? I low key, sorry to cut you off. I low key think you were going to say something similar. The Cebuanos are very proud people. That's one thing that my dad told me about. My dad is from the Bicol region, so it's like in between the
uh,
Manila region and the Bisaya
yeah, yeah,
region, right?
yeah,
And then he would always say like, "Oh, when you will know if they're Cebuano Bisaya because they will say I'm Bisaya," you know. And I'm like, okay, dad.
yeah,
Meanwhile, like for him, he was like, oh, we would say Bicolano if we know there are people like they're Bicolano in the area. To if not, they're just not going to be like they'll try to speak Tagalog as well, not to
yeah,
alienate themselves. But the Cebuano people are very proud Cebuano people, so they would let you know.
That for
Wow.
sure, yeah. So that's why. And even in my bio, I don't say I'm Filipino. I'm Cebu.
I mean, listen, if you go to IRCC, the Canada Immigration, and they ask for your native language, there you can put Cebuano. So yes, this is distinguishing identifier.
Yeah. So in what ways have I not been Cebuano enough, or have I felt not Cebuano enough? It's always been in the sense that, well, like even in the multiple identities that I have, or no, multiple nationalities or the bloodlines that have come through me. My mom's side is Chinese. My dad has Chinese influence too. So I'm not really purely quote unquote Cebuano. And then having grown up with more like bilingual, like knowing how to speak in English more, and then with my family always having that outward view of going outside of Cebu.
Hmm.
Those are always things that have made me feel kind of um
Disconnected.
no, not disconnected. Mm, more so that, well, I guess yeah, it is disconnected because some I have friends who are just like very sure that they're from there, friends who are like friends who have grown up there, their parents are from there and everything. So it is that, like, in what ways have not been
Oh,
said one.
not. I guess you'd say like less rooted.
Mm,
Mm.
yeah.
Precision of language. Ah.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So less rooted. But then at the same time, I speak more Cebuano than they do.
Right, right. And I
And
mean,
these are
for
people who are in the Philippines, who are in Cebu.
like that hurts a lot to me because you and I are making so much effort to be able to keep the language. And not borrow like Spanish words. And I would get make fun of. I mean, I don't normally look at the comments in the reports that I'm featured at, but sometimes they would say like bakit ganyan magsalita? And I'm just like, we're supposed to be speaking like this, diba? Like, we're not supposed to be Englishized or like Tagalog guys, like English words and like borrow Spanish words when we do have our own words. Like, you don't need to say Celia. We can say upuan. Like,
Ano.
we have words like that, you know? So, yeah, that kind of hella like triggered something about me too. But it hurts. It hurts to really see that. And then they have the audacity to say we're not Filipino enough, right? I'm like, you
True, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
don't even
It's
speak.
that too. It's that too. It's more
Uh-huh.
like a even like a subconscious, or even just like a way they carry themselves, knowing that I have lived outside of the country. I'm treated as someone more special because I've gone out. When in
Mhm.
reality, like try living here and see if it's any special.
Not special. It's way too cold. Like you don't have running water right now.
That's right. That's right. I don't have running water right now. I had to like push our meeting back 15 minutes because I was like carrying like buckets of water so I can use it for tabo and shit.
Oh well. I mean, see, this is why conversations like this, be it we have one audience, be it we have 100 audience, like we're literally planting seeds and opening the doors for other people to make themselves feel proud of their where they came from, tahanan ng ating lahi.
Mm.
And that being said, what does kapwa mean to you? I know it's not a Cebuano Bisaya word. I know it's more of a Tagalog word, but the general feeling of it.
Yeah, kapwa, kapwa, kapwa. I see it in the efforts we make to see ourselves in each other. And even in this one, in our what we're doing is that our languages are different, but the fact that we're still trying to see the similarities in how the language sort of encompasses healing, encompasses our worldviews, for example. I think that's part of Kapwa. I think also that it's because Kapwa is so encompassing. It's
It's
hard to
broad.
yeah. Every time I talk about it, it's only just one facet of Kapwa. So let's keep it short like that, and then people can answer it. And people can.
I mean, listen, every time we ask these questions, it's always like a big pause.
Mm,
Because people do start wondering what's because you said like, oh, only one thing of it that says about what kapwa means, but it is
yeah.
super broad that it touches so many aspects. and I like to keep it that way.
Yeah.
It's encompassing on so many feelings and encompassing more than community, more than you being Bisaya, Cebuano, more than me being like a Tagalog speaker. And I think to unpack it, because this is a healing through words, it is the space that we shared with as someone from the islands of the so-called Philippines. And I think that's a good way to finish this podcast. Everything's Political, hosted by me, Veronica, joined by Alixia. Actually, you're probably one of the first guests of this podcast. So
Well, thank you.
we just nerded out, and I'm just like, you need to come and let's go talk about this, because I nerd about this to my partner, but she's generous enough to put her time on, but she also is very mindful of taking spaces in spaces like this where she is not Filipino. So thank you for
But at
giving.
Kapwa, she's still welcome.
I know, right? But like, but this is our space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand.
Any parting words for our dear listeners, for those who wants to get to know you more, where can they reach you out? Where your artworks and your work? We're listening.
Okay. Wow, thanks for that opportunity. I can be reached mostly through my Instagram. It's at Alixia Lacerna, ALIXALACERNA. And then in my bio are the uh two other more community oriented work that I do. So you'll find it there.
There you go. I mean, I will also put your information in this podcast episode under Radyo Kapwa on CKUT 90.3 FM. This is Veronica and Alexa telling
Thank
you,
you, Vero.
mabuhay!
So fun.
Bonjour et bienvenue. Si vous venez de nous rejoindre, je suis Fanny Christo et vous écoutez à Radio Kapwa sur 90.3 FM CKUT. Le printemps sonne ici et la neige commence à fondre, donc vous pouvez, how you say, come out of hibernation. So, what are some good events and things to hit up? I'm gonna let y'all know because we're about to get into the community announcements. Comme je dis toujours, trouvez un stylo et des papiers ou ouvrez votre application de calendrier et on y va. So let's start with this evening actually, March 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Reggie's Bar on 455 Boulevard de Maisonneuve West. Our very own Vero, whom you heard earlier in today's show, will be taking part in Breaking Structures, Creating Bonds, a panel about anti-racism in Montreal's urban context, brought to you by Concordia School of Community and Public Affairs. You can join Vero and the other panelists for an exciting evening where they'll discuss combating racism in Montreal's urban settings while aiming to understand how systemic issues present themselves in society and how collective engagement and community education can help combat them. Check out their Instagram page for registration at scpasa.concordia. Prochain à la fin de semaine, March 15 from 3 to 5 p.m. at La Place Commune, Collective 4891 is hosting another cafe and collage. You can come enjoy a cozy afternoon of crafting in community at Café La Place Commune, a nonprofit solidarity cooperative in Parc Extension. Open to all and no registration required, and all materials will be provided. Plus, the cafe will be open with vegetarian food and beverage for purchase. For more info, you can visit their Instagram page at Collective 4891. Finally, for the week, from 6 to 8 p.m. on March 19 at The Hive, Concordia School of Community and Public Affairs is hosting another panel, The University We Want, a discussion on the links between university structures, governance, privatization, and how to revolutionize these institutions from the bottom up. This panel will explore power dynamics and the repression experienced on campuses. Questions will be explored such as whose interests guide decision making, whose interests do they serve? You can check out their Instagram page for these answers and for more info at scpasa.concordia. Now, you know what? Let's fast forward a bit into the end of March. As part of the festival Access Azi, Santa Capo has partnered up with Tangent Dance, Soft Gong, and Fake Knot to bring you Piña, a choreographic piece that explores diasporic identity and memory through dance and music. This will be a 4-day event from March 27 to 30 at Tangent Dance near Metro Plaza, and there will be a mini fiesta featuring karaoke, Filipino bites, and an exhibition starting at 6 p.m. The Wilder Cafe Bar transforms into a true party with the sounds and flavors of the Philippines. Honestly, you know what? There's actually a lot to say about this event and not enough time, so go to accessaz.com to get all the deets, but I gotta plug this extra detail in. I'll be actually performing as a DJ on opening night, March 27th, so if you're there, say what's up. Now, that's about it, c'est tout. And if you're brand new to the show, the community announcements also means we are at the end of our broadcast. So, yeah, unfortunately, I have to say my farewells and adios and all that stuff. But you can check us out, Radio Kapwa, every Wednesday, 2 at Lamerca D from 2 to 3 p.m. on 90.3 FM CKUT. This has been your boy, Fenny Cristo, and I'm going to catch y'all again next week. Peace and blessings.